closed for business. It's day 5 of the partial government shutdown. Why it may not end anytime soon. Danger ahead. Officials in Indonesia issue another warning following Saturday's deadly tsunami. A crash story. The Vatican displays dozens of nativity scenes from artists around the world. And Christmas Carol in a Cave, a version of Silent Night unlike any you've ever heard before. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, December 26, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Jason Calvi, in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump make a surprise visit to U.S. troops in Iraq. It's the president's first visit with soldiers stationed in a troubled region. 15 years after the initial invasion of Iraq, the U.S. has more than 5,000 troops there. They're supporting the government in fighting remaining pockets of resistance by the Islamic State. President Trump and Congress stay stuck in a budgetary stalemate. It's the first full business day of the partial government shutdown. It started Friday night, and there's no end in sight. The president yesterday said the closed parts of the government will stay that way until he gets funding for a U.S.-Mexico border wall.
I can't tell you when the government's going to be open. I can tell you it's not going to be open until we have a wall, a fence, whatever they'd like to call it. I'll call it whatever they want. But it's all the same thing. It's a barrier from people pouring into our country.
President Trump says Democrats oppose a wall only because he's for one. But even some Republicans disagree. GOP Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee calls the political border wall standoff a made-up fight.
This is something that is unnecessary. It's a spectacle. And candidly, it's juvenile. The whole thing is juvenile. I want to see real border security, and that's why I'm disappointed at where we've ended up at the end of this Congress.
We apologize, but due to the lapse in federal funding, we are unable to take your call.
White House switchboard operators are among the roughly 800,000 federal employees impacted, but more than half of those are considered essential and must work without pay, though retroactive pay is expected. Another 380,000 federal employees are furloughed, meaning they'll not report to work but will be paid later. The closure is expected to last at least through Thursday when the House and Senate meet again. Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi say they want to put money into technology and other means of border security. In a joint statement, they blamed the president for plunging the country into chaos, saying the president wanted the shutdown, but he seems not to know how to get himself out of it. President Trump insists wall construction is underway and will continue.
Yesterday, I gave out 115 miles worth of wall, 115 miles in Texas. And it's going to be built, hopefully rapidly. I'm going there at the end of January for the start of construction. That's a big stretch because we're talking about 500 to 550 miles total.
The Senate gavels in at 4 tomorrow afternoon, but so far Democrats and Republicans have not struck a funding deal. A second immigrant child in U.S. custody has died. The 8-year-old boy was from Guatemala. Felipe Gomez Alonso died Monday night after going to the hospital twice. U.S. Customs and Border Protection has ordered a medical checkup on every child in custody. Earlier this month, a 7-year-old immigrant girl also died. Now let's talk about this with Alex Nowrasteh, Senior Immigration Policy Analyst at the Cato Institute. Alex, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So we've now seen 2 children die in U.S. custody. In your opinion, what's needed to stop this?
Well, this is a really deep and serious problem. What is happening is the Border Patrol is not following a lot of its own guidelines and taking care of these children. We recently saw after the announcement of the death of the second child on Christmas Eve at 11:48 p.m. on Christmas Eve that CBP is now going to be doing medical checks of children under the age of 10 once they get into government custody. This is something that should have been done from the beginning. There are about 15,000 children that we know of in the custody of the federal government who are separated from their parents in detention facilities across the Southwest. Once these people are in government care, it really is the government's responsibility to take care of them. So we need to make sure that they at least at a minimum have the minimum medical and dietary requirements met so that they don't die when they're under the jurisdiction of the federal government.
I know there was some debate about the young girl who died, debate about whether she was sick before she even crossed the border, before she even was under U.S. custody.
Yeah, there was some debate about that, but this second boy was apprehended on December 18th and didn't start showing any kind of symptoms till days later, and didn't die until the 24th on Christmas Eve. So he might have gotten ill before. It was an incubation period. He didn't show any symptoms till afterwards, but he did become ill initially and got worse and worse while under the government's supervision.
So sad that this happened right here in this country, and on Christmas as well. The current government shutdown is tied to border security, President Trump's campaign promise to build a wall. You are opposed to a wall. Why?
So the couple big problems with the wall. One is it's very expensive to build it along the border. The second is, in order to do that, you're going to have to take hundreds of miles worth of private property. The government will have to take that from American citizens in the form of eminent domain to build a wall on that. The third one is that it's not going to be that effective when it comes to border security. We have had walls in the past. We have walls in different areas. And what we know about right now is the vast majority of illegal immigrants who come into the country, who stay here, they enter legally and they overstay their visa. So a border wall is not going to be effective at that. What we see in 2018, there are about 400,000 apprehensions of illegal immigrants across the border by Border Patrol, but about 100,000 families were apprehended. Those people were seeking asylum. Those people were asking the United States government for refuge from violence in their home countries. They turned themselves into Border Patrol. A wall is not going to stop people from asking for asylum at the U.S. border or at Border Patrol agents, which is their right under American law. So a wall is just not going to be effective here.
So let's look at this shutdown and sort of the political risk for Republicans as the shutdown just continues to drag on.
So I think that this is one of these DC sort of swamp myths, right? That like a shutdown is really bad politically. I think it's maybe bad for a week, maybe 2 weeks. It makes the party that's responsible look bad. But after that, I don't think anybody really gets in any kind of permanent political trouble. I mean, most of us in America wouldn't even know that a government shutdown is occurring because most of what they do doesn't matter anyway. I mean, I'm here in Indiana right now for Christmas. Nobody's talking about the government shutdown. Nobody even notices. Nobody seems to care that much. I think it's really this thing that, like, DC insiders like ourselves pay attention to, but most of the country doesn't.
Well, Alex Nowrasteh, thank you so much for your time. Senior Immigration Policy Analyst at the Cato Institute. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
And President Trump names an acting defense secretary to soon replace James Mattis. Patrick Shanahan, the deputy defense secretary, begins January 1st. He's a former senior executive at Boeing and has little experience in international affairs. Mattis resigned last week in protest over the president's decision to remove U.S. troops from Syria. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has left the hospital following cancer surgery. The court spokeswoman says the justice is recovering at home. Doctors on Friday removed 2 malignant growths in her left lung. A judge sentences a priest to prison. John Sweeney is the first person sentenced because of the Pennsylvania grand jury report released in August. That report alleged hundreds of clergy had abused children over 7 decades. John Sweeney received 11.5 months to 5 years in prison. The Archdiocese of New York faces questions over its recent removal of a retired priest accused of abuse. The New York Times reports Father Donald Timoney was allowed to continue public ministry despite those charges. Last year, an independent commission compensated 2 of the alleged victims. The priest retired in 2009, but still celebrated Mass. The Archdiocese defends itself, saying it followed church norms. Indonesia issues a new warning just days after a tsunami killed more than 400 people. They're telling people to avoid coastal areas over fears there may be another tsunami. Saturday night's disaster forced more than 21,000 people out of their homes. Pope Francis asks the faithful to pray for those impacted. An earthquake jolting eastern Sicily this morning injures at least 10 people. An eruption from Mount Etna triggered the quake. It damaged churches and homes Etna is the largest of Italy's 3 active volcanoes. The long-delayed presidential election in the Democratic Republic of Congo is postponed again, but only in certain parts of the country. Election officials say people in areas hit by a deadly Ebola outbreak will not cast ballots until March. The rest of the country votes Sunday. The move applies to more than 1 million voters. The main opposition leader says it's a ploy to hurt his chances of winning. Catholic leaders say the election is taking place amid a crisis of confidence in the country. More than 100 nativity scenes are on display at the Vatican. It's part of an international exhibit held by the Pontifical Council for the Promotion of the New Evangelization. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley gives us a tour.
Baby Jesus rocking in a mechanical cradle. Joseph and Mary built out of colorful corn husks. An entire village welcoming the birth of Jesus, all crocheted by hand, and a nativity scene built with penne and spaghetti. These are just some of the creative nativity scenes on display at the Vatican's 100 Presepi exhibit, Italian for 100 creches. Artists from around the world, including Panama, Croatia, and Taiwan, submitted their works of art for a chance to be on display here. Father Jacques-Yves Pertin is from France and toured the exhibit. It shows how each nation welcomes the mystery of Christmas, he tells us. Molly Weiner, a theology student visiting from Helena, Montana, agrees.
It's definitely interesting to see how the various countries portray the nativity in their own culture.
The origins of the nativity scene date back to 1223. St. Francis of Assisi is credited with creating his first crib scene to show devotion to the birth of Jesus Christ. While there are no prizes for the creative work, visitors we spoke to favor the cribs designed in Naples, Italy, for the extravagant scenes and the attention to detail. For Molly, she feels it has strengthened her Catholic faith.
So this is a great way, I believe, to kind of prep yourself for the Christmas season.
The Vatican hopes this exhibit can help keep the tradition alive, while at the same time being a strong instrument for evangelization. Visitors can view the exhibit until January 13th. At the Vatican, Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, the author of a recent book tells us how a Catholic movie star influenced American culture in the 1940s.
La logica del perdono e della misericordia sempre è vincente, sempre.
Pope Francis says St. Stephen teaches us to forgive others. He was speaking at his Angelus address today at the Vatican. The Holy Father also says the first martyr reminds us to trust in God. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jason Calvi in for Lauren Ashburn. Bing Crosby was a beloved movie star who dominated Hollywood and American culture for decades. He was also a devout Catholic and won an Academy Award for his portrayal of Father Chuck O'Malley in the 1944 movie Going My Way. A recent book, Bing Crosby, Swinging on a Star, The War Years, examines Crosby's influence on American culture. Lauren Ashburn has more.
Joining me now is Gary Giddins, the book's author. Gary, welcome to our broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
You have written in great detail about Bing Crosby's life. He's one of my favorite actors and crooners. But today I want to focus on the impact his role of Father O'Malley has had on American culture. He was a devout Catholic. His mother was a devout Catholic. He was raised in the faith. And you write that, quote, Father O'Malley emerged as a superhuman fount of liberal wisdom, empathy, and action. Tell us about the role that he created with Leo McCarey.
It was partly based on the priest that he studied with and grew up with at Gonzaga University and before that Gonzaga High School. He created a character who is able to work miracles of a sort. He turns a group of juvenile delinquents into a choir. He turns a cranky old Father Fitzgibbon, brilliantly played by Barry Fitzgerald, into Mama's baby boy when he brings his 90-year-old mother in from Ireland.
Let's take a listen to a great line from Going My Way.
Laugh and the world laughs with you, we used to say. Cry and you cry all by yourself.
What impact did Father O'Malley have on the perception of priests during that time period in the 40s?
I got a number of calls in the year after the first book came out, Bing Crosby, A Pocket Full of Dreams, from priests. Most of them, I imagine, were in their 60s or 70s at the time, and they all said that they decided to join the priesthood after seeing Going My Way.
The New York Times review of your book said Crosby's portrayal of Father O'Malley gave the Catholic Church its best PR. Today, the Catholic Church has been shaken by allegations of clergy sex abuse. In our exclusive Catholic in America poll conducted in September, 49% of Catholics had an excellent or good perception of how parish priests were handling those allegations. 31% responded fair or poor. So in today's culture, could a movie like Going My Way and a character like Father O'Malley still be produced and be successful?
I don't think so. You have to remember that in the years even preceding Going My Way, although it was considered a big mistake to make a movie about religion because the assumption was that nobody would go except members of that faith, but nevertheless there were a lot of movies with priestly characters played by Spencer Tracy and Edward O'Brien and lots of others, and they're always exemplary human beings, not quite as miraculous as the figure that Crosby plays. So in the 1940s, I would say in the whole post-war era from, say, 1945 to 1965, you have a number of things that are really improving the public image of what Catholicism means in the world, and specifically in the United States. You have the incredible popularity of Fulton Sheen on television. You have the election of our first Catholic president, JFK. And Going My Way and Bells of St. Mary's remained among the best, the most popular movies of all time, well into the 1960s.
Crosby reprised the role of Father O'Malley in the Bells of St. Mary's.
So proudly ring out while we...
Why was that important?
The first film, Going My Way, was so enormous that there was a tremendous demand for a return. And Leo McCarey got the idea of taking the most popular actress of that period, Ingrid Bergman, and without getting into a romantic liaison, he created a different kind of relationship for O'Malley, and it was an even bigger hit.
And she was a nun.
Well, yes, she plays a nun and a teacher.
You go into great detail about his life. He worked hard on his public persona, but his private life was reportedly difficult. He contemplated divorce, and after his death, one of his children accused him of abuse. How did his Catholic faith help guide him through some of those struggles?
Well, he was genuinely a religious man. There's no question about that. One of his servants told me that Mr. Crosby was on his knees every evening saying prayers, and everybody who knew him said that he never missed Mass, which he recited in the Latin. He was a choir boy, and he never left the church. And so Crosby was able to confess certain things away, but not deal with divorce. When Crosby had a second chance, he took it. And he was a very different father and a very different husband in the second marriage. He had 3 very successful children with his wife, the former Catherine Grant. And they all venerate him. I have to say that of the 4 sons, only one of them wrote that book, and one of them denied many of the allegations. Philip, the others admitted that life was difficult at home. But again, I think Crosby was trying to recreate in his home the sense of discipline that he felt helped mold him in a good way when he was attending Gonzaga.
I think we're going to have to leave it there. Gary Giddins, author of Bing Crosby, Swinging on a Star, The War Years, 1940 to 1946. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
Up next, how President Trump spent Christmas. And we'll show you a unique version of Silent Night.
Padre buono e noi siamo tutti fratelli.
Pope Francis says he wants people of all faiths to get along. He gave his annual Christmas greeting yesterday at the Vatican. The Holy Father says the world's differences are reason to celebrate, not be angry. He also prayed for the end of wars in Syria and Yemen. Glad to have you with us tonight. I'm Jason Calvi in for Lauren Ashburn. And President Trump spent the holiday in Washington, D.C. On Monday, he visited a Christmas Eve service at the Protestant National Cathedral. First Lady Melania Trump joined the president, and yesterday they sent a Christmas message through social media. And finally tonight, the beloved Christmas carol Silent Night turns 200 years old. EWTN contributor Colin Flynn shows us a version of the song you probably never saw before.
Luray Caverns, deep under the town of Luray in Virginia, have been formed over millions of years, only to be discovered in 1878 by 3 local men looking to get rich quick.
They were actually called phantom chasers by the residents of Luray. They really weren't too interested in a hard day's work. One was a photographer, the other was a tinsmith, and there was not a lot of work in a small town like Luray in 1878. So they began scouring the hillside. They actually discovered one of the largest caverns in the world. Quite a remarkable story.
In the largest cave called the Cathedral, there is something extraordinary. It is an organ, but no ordinary organ, for this is the Great Stalagpipe organ, the largest musical instrument in the world. It creates its sound by rubber mallets striking the stalactites which hang from the ceiling. It was built in 1954 by Leland Sprinkle, a mathematician and electronic scientist working in the Pentagon, who had a passion for organs. And one of the pieces of music he wanted it to play was Silent Night.
Leland was a religious person, and I remember Mr. Sprinkle saying on numerous occasions, if the technology would have existed and man would have understood how to use this, these stalactites had the ability to play Silent Night on the very night Christ was born. I thought that was a very moving comment.
Well, on the 200th anniversary of the composing of Silent Night, a choir have gathered in the Great Caverns.
What you're about to hear is quite special. Behind me is the Page County Community Choir under the direction of Dr. Tanya Holland, and playing the organ is Charles King. Together, they're going to perform for you Silent Night like you've never heard it before.
Wow, so beautiful. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, Merry Christmas. I'm Jason Calvi. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Jason Calvi on Twitter and at Jason Calvi TV on Facebook. Good night and God bless.